Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Myron and Marion Casden Director, Dr. Bruce Zuckerman.
Thank you. Everybody hear me all right? Yes. In the back? Yep. All right. Anyone want to hear me all right? Yes. Anyway, good afternoon. As the man says, I'm Bruce Zuckerman, the Myron and Marion Casden Director of the Casden Institute for the Study of the Jewish Role in American Life, and I'm also a professor of religion here at USC. On behalf of the USC Casden Institute and the Nemer Committee, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this, our 32nd annual Jerome Nemer Lecture in Jewish Thought. I would particularly like to acknowledge the Nemer family, especially Harriet and her daughters Janet and Joan, and all the family and their guests who will be around for either the lecture or the dinner. Without them, we wouldn't be here. I would also like to take a minute to acknowledge, well, you know, there's so many of our friends here tonight, it's hard to know who to be in, but I do want to take the time and at least especially to acknowledge Sam and Miriam Tarika. Sam is Vice President and CFO of the Maurice Amato Foundation, which has generously supported the publicity of the Casden Institute materials over the years with steadfast support and friendship. And so some of the things that you're looking at are thanks to the Amato Foundation. And thank you, Sam, who is here, I know. And over there, sitting, everybody turn to the door. That's my Associate Director, Lisa Ansell. Look hard, because she may not be here by the end of the night. Lisa always seems to time her children to arrive within days of the Nemer lecture. This is the second time, and she has, how shall we say, she's made a covenant with her babies that they are not to arrive until after the Nemer lecture. So but I want to acknowledge Lisa because everything that goes right here is her doing. And she is the one who makes this lecture, and indeed much of everything that happens at the Casden Institute happen and possible. Now, speaking of the Casden Institute, I invite you to learn more about us by visiting our website. The address is on the back of your program. Also upstairs, you can fill out a form to be added and thereby be added to our mailing list. You know that table where you all signed in. If you still like the lecture at the end and say, oh, I'd like to come to more, besides not only the Nemer lecture, other lectures that we do, we'll put you on the mailing list and you'll know all about them. I also want to note that copies of Volume 9 of the Casden Annual Review and all our other previous volumes are available for sale on Amazon.com or at the USC bookstore and through the Casden offices. You can also get them directly from their publisher, Purdue University Press. Volume 9 of the Casden Review is entitled Beyond Alliances, The Jewish Role in Reshaping the Racial Landscape of Southern California. It is guest edited by my good friend and colleague, George Sanchez, Professor of American Studies and Ethnicity at USC, and focuses on the special role that Jews played in establishing crucial, long-standing relationships with minority groups in the 20th century. In particular, this edition is one of the first to examine the unique racial ethnic makeup of Southern California with a particular focus on key individuals within the Jewish community who were pioneers in forging relationships in previously uncharted social and demographic territory. We're very proud of our Casden volumes. We think they are really remarkably, we try to break ground with every one. And so Volume 9 was a particularly successful one. And we are pleased to announce that the forthcoming publication of Volume 10 of the Annual Review, this volume, engages a very interesting question. Can the art being produced today by visual artists who happen to be Jewish and who are self-consciously engaging in Jewish themes be properly labeled as Jewish art, that's art with a capital A? Indeed, are we currently in a golden age of Jewish modern art, as the lead article in Volume 10 suggests? This volume, whose articles survey aspects of Jewish art, over the last 40 years or so, including discussions of architecture and film, aims to give us a perspective on art that is Jewish, or if you prefer, Jewish art as it is evolving today. It'll be published in December, and I'm happy to say that the guest editor sitting right here in the corner is Ruth Weisberg, who, whenever I get a chance, I always say that Ruth is the most famous artist who I can call by her first name. And she's been a joy to work with, and we've had a lot of fun doing this volume. It'll be out in December, and we'll be bragging about it. Oh, I should have held out. This is the 9, by the way. It's the green one. Now, I am delighted to introduce Paul Lerner, chairman of the Nemer Committee, to introduce our speaker tonight. So, Paul, you're on.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to move the microphone a little bit. This is now my 3rd year as chair of the Nemer Committee, and it's been really a great privilege. So I want to thank the Nemer family again for making all of this possible, as well as the Casden Institute and the members of the committee and the community for coming and supporting this wonderful lecture series. I'm really pleased that over the last couple of years, I've now had the chance to spend some time with Daniel Mendelsohn, who spoke 2 years ago, David Sorkin last year, and this time Jane Eisner. I want to quickly, before I introduce Jane Eisner, I want to just make a quick plug for next year's talk. You can put it in your calendars now. Save the date of Sunday, November 10th. 2014, we're going to have Jeffrey Chandler from Rutgers University, who,
2013.
What did I say? 2014. I skipped a year. 2013, November 10th, 2013, Jeffrey Chandler from Rutgers University. I'm sorry? Okay. So it's now, and I'm also going to part from the program a little bit. I'm going to introduce both the speaker and the respondent together, and they're going to come take their places on the stage, and then I'll disappear back into the audience and come back at the end to moderate a Q&A session with the audience. So first, it's really a tremendous pleasure and honor for me to introduce Jane Eisner, who's the editor-in-chief of The Forward and has occupied that position since 2008. She'll talk about, I think, the challenges of taking a newspaper which really grew out of a very different environment, a very different context for Jews living in the United States, and adapting it to today's situation. So I think it's extraordinary how she's managed to make The Forward stay relevant and challenging and up-to-date and dynamic. So it'll be, I think, really interesting to hear her present about The Forward and the broader media landscape of Jews in America today. Before she joined The Forward, she held executive editorial and news positions at the Philadelphia Inquirer for about 25 years. In 2006, she joined the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, where she served as vice president for national programs and initiatives with responsibility for all adult programming, the Liberty Medal, and the Peter Jennings Project for Journalists and the Constitution. She's also someone with deep roots in academia. She was the first Koppel Fellow in journalism at Wesleyan University, where she teaches journalism and nonfiction writing. From 2002 through 2006, she was a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Robert A. Fox Leadership Program, as well as an adjunct professor in the school's political science department. In 2006, she was one of 3 women chosen to be first fellows of the new Catherine Houghton Hepburn Center at Bryn Mawr College, where she led conferences and workshops and was the college's 2007 commencement speaker. Eisner's editorials have won national and regional awards, including the Sigma Delta Chi Award for editorial writing from the Society of Professional Journalists in 2012 and 2010, along with the 2012 and 11 awards for opinion writing from the Deadline Club, SPJ's New York chapter. In 2009, she was one of 20 fellows in the Punch Salzburger Executive News Media Leadership Program at the Columbia School of Journalism. And it's at the Columbia School of Journalism where she received a master's degree, and she holds a bachelor's degree cum laude from Wesleyan University. She's also an author, having written the book Taking Back the Vote, Getting American Youth Involved in Our Democracy, which was published by Beacon Press in 2004. Eisner also serves as the host of The Salon, the first ever women's program produced by the Jewish Channel, which debuted in 2009. Finally, in addition to her Inquirer column, American Rhythms, which was syndicated to 100 newspapers, Eisner has also written for The Washington Post, Newsday, Brookings Review, Columbia Journalism Review, Ma'ayan, and The Reconstructionist, and served as a regular panelist on WPVI television talk show Inside Story. So I'm delighted to present Jane Eisner today, who will be speaking on challenges and changes in the Jewish media today. And hold your applause for 1 second while I introduce our very distinguished respondent, whom I'm proud to call a good friend. Sarah Bunin Benor is Associate Professor of Contemporary Jewish Studies at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, and Adjunct Associate Professor in the Department of Linguistics at USC. She received her PhD from Stanford in 2004 in linguistics. She's published and lectured widely about Jewish languages, linguistics, Yiddish, American Jews, and Orthodox Jews, making her, I think, really the ideal respondent for this talk this afternoon. Her book is coming out really any day now, any week now. The really much awaited book, Becoming From, How Newcomers Learn the Language and Culture of Orthodox Judaism, which will be appearing very shortly with Rutgers University Press. And she's about to launch a new website called the Jewish English Lexicon, which you can find on jewish-languages.org. So with great pleasure, let me call the two speakers to come forward.
Thank you, Paul, and let me also add my thanks to Lisa Ansel. Both Paul and Lisa have been just amazingly assiduous in keeping me on track all these many months and making it possible for me to be here, and it's really an honor. I want to thank the Casden Institute and the Nemer family for making this possible. In May of 2010, The Forward published a 10-page section celebrating the life and work of Abraham Kahn, our founding editor and a giant in American Jewish journalism. The occasion was what would have been his 150th birthday. Kahn died in 1951, but his face and his presence are everywhere today in our newsroom, staring down at me from the walls of my office, his eyes stern, his mustache just so. And when you read that section, you could understand why it seems that he's never left us. Kahn ran the Yiddish Forwards for half a century, turning it into what was the largest and arguably the most important Yiddish newspaper in history. In its heyday, the Forwards had more readers than any other non-English newspaper in America, an achievement that has never been surpassed. I wrote a piece then asking, what would Ab Kahn do in journalism today? What would he do when the business model that served him well, and all of us well, for so long, has been completely upended, when readership is fragmented, attention spans have shrunk, and let's be honest, anyone with a blog address and an opinion can call himself a journalist. How would Ab Kahn cover a Jewish community that is so prosperous and powerful, and yet so polarized and disparate, speaking many different languages, not only the Yiddish of his readers? What would Ab do? That question has haunted me ever since I became editor of The Forward in 2008, 4 years ago. Kahn contributed mightily to the evolution of American journalism in the 20th century, Jewish and secular, and I would give anything to be able to ask him advice about the challenges posed in today's complicated, confusing, and still exhilarating media landscape. But I can't. I won't attempt to turn this august lecture hall into a seance, nor will I pretend that I can challenge Kahan's personality, which was known to be difficult. As Irving Howe noted in his authoritative 1976 History of Jewish Immigration, World of Our Fathers, Kahan was, quote, irritable and cranky, inordinately vain, and seldom at ease, unquote. I'm not sure that this type of public persona would work on a podcast today. Instead, this evening, I will try to put our current challenges in brief historical context and then offer some perspectives on where Jewish media, really Jewish journalism in particular, is going, and why, even in this moment of rapid change, I think the past has so much to teach us. First, some definitions. Media, in our vernacular, has come to mean a very broad array of communications. Journalism, in my opinion, is a more precise craft. Long ago, I made up my own elevator speech about what I believed a good newspaper should do: inform, reflect, crusade, connect. I believe just as strongly today that a good journalistic organization demands all these characteristics. It's not enough to simply opine. We need to inform our readers and listeners, reflect upon their lives, champion their causes, and connect them to each other and to the broader community. Journalism, at first through newspapers, then radio and television, and now through the internet, has always been a public trust in America, protected by the First Amendment and the unwritten rules of our profession. Unlike random bloggers and videographers, we have an address. You know where you can address your complaint, your praise, or, as sometimes happens, your lawsuit. We have a responsibility to verify information before it is published and to try to the very best of our abilities to ensure that what we published is true and fair. I remember when our youngest daughter called late one night to tell us excitedly that Osama bin Laden had been killed. She said the news was all over Facebook, many long minutes before it was reported in the mainstream media. Well, I said, that's nice, but Facebook and its gazillion friends don't need to get the facts right, and they don't need to verify information. Journalists do. When it comes to Jewish journalism, I'm reminded of something that Steve Rabinowitz, who is a communications expert in Washington, what he often says about the Jewish vote: Jews are like all other Americans, but more so. Jewish journalism is like American journalism, but more so. We have all the challenges facing the industry as a whole, with the additional challenge of defining and reaching a broad, diverse, and sometimes undefinable audience. Our community's involvement with the press dates back to revolutionary times, when you could find ads for Jewish concerns or letters written by Jews in newspapers from Rhode Island to South Carolina. The first Jewish periodical was begun in 1823, when there were barely 3,000 Jews in the entire country. But the real beginning of the Jewish press occurred in Philadelphia in 1843, when the Chazan of Mikveh Israel Synagogue, a man named Isaac Leeser, founded a monthly journal called The Occident and American Jewish Advocate. As Kenneth Lebo writes in his essay on the history of American Jewish journalism, Leeser's publication appeared when the Jewish population was growing rapidly, Between 1850 and 1860, the number grew from 50,000 to 150,000, tripled the number in just 10 years. And I'm quoting from Lebo. With neither a native-born rabbinate nor national organizations of any significance to turn to for guidance, Jews looked to Leser's Occident and subsequent Jewish journals for answers to questions regarding Jewish behavior and identity in this new world, both in relation to other Jews and to a broader society of fellow Americans, unquote. And then Lieber continues, repeatedly on the pages of the Occident, Leser insisted that America was not a Christian nation in which Jews were tolerated as a minority, but rather that Jews were entitled to the same rights as other religious groups, unquote. This role of writing for the community while championing its rights to the broader American society is one that we see repeated again and again. The years that followed the Civil War saw a dramatic increase in the Jewish population in many cities and the rise of regional papers. Isaac Mayer Wise's Israelite in Cincinnati, the Jewish Exponent in Philadelphia, newspapers in Boston, New York, Baltimore, Rochester, Chicago, St. Louis, New Orleans, Memphis, San Francisco, and more. There were specialty journals for housewives, for farmers, and for children. And then there was the Yiddish press. The secular Yiddish press came into its own in the 1880s and 1890s with the influx of Eastern European Jews to America's cities and towns. Kahan became the first editor of the Forwards in 1897, left for a couple of years, was lured back, and then stayed for half a century, leading a newspaper that in its heyday sold 250,000 copies every day, coast to coast. It probably had 750,000 readers every single day, because in those days, in an immigrant community, a newspaper would be really passed around. The Forwards was launched at a singular moment of high-impact journalism. As the historian Moses Rishon writes, and here I'm quoting, in no time or place did newspaper reporters play so salient and so dramatic a role in shaping the popular mind as they did in New York between 1897 and 1902, when Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst drove the new journalism to unprecedented heights of influence, virtuosity, and extravagance, unquote. Kahan's Forward was an enviable mix of what today we'd call highbrow and pedestrian, strewn with sensational stories of gambling, prostitution, scandal, and all manner of misdeeds on the Lower East Side and elsewhere, along with thundering editorials and erudite essays and the original work of such great literary titans as Isaac Bashevis Singer and Elie Wiesel. Not to mention the publication of masterpieces such as Madame Bovary that were translated into Yiddish and published serially to expose immigrant readers to the classics. Kahan's newspaper, Lebo observed, served as a university in print. A university in print. Its politics were social democratic, aligned closely with labor, disdainful of communism, and absolutely in love with America. Kahan was intent on using the pages of the Forward to help his immigrant readers become American. His vehicle was the Bintel Brief, the bundle of letters, launched on January 20th, 1906, an advice column that helped perplexed readers navigate the shoals of American life. There, Kahan explained the rules of baseball and how to use a thermometer. There was advice on how to can peaches and use a handkerchief and employ good manners on the street. Kahan replaced the shtetl rabbi as the immigrant's moral guide. I just have to read you one of my favorites. Here's the question. I am a young man of 25, and I recently met a fine girl. She has a flaw, however, a dimple in her chin. It is said that people who have this lose their first husband or wife. I love her very much, but I'm afraid to marry her lest I die because of the dimple. And Kahn's answer, the tragedy is not that the girl has a dimple in her chin, but that some people have a screw loose in their heads. Boy, do I wish I could write like that. Kahn had an extraordinary sense of who his readers were. As Lawrence Epstein, the historian, writes, the foreword also served as a crucial psychological role for the workers who read it. Their dire lives were marked by struggle and frequently by self-doubts and concerns that their families and neighbors were going to see them as failures. The foreword gave them pride in themselves. They were, in its pages, struggling as a community. Theirs was not a lonely crowd, unquote. A very powerful illustration of this connection came on March 25th, 1911, when the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory on Washington Place in Lower Manhattan burst into flames. 146 workers, most of them Jewish and Italian immigrant women and girls, were trapped behind locked doors on the top floors of this 10-story building, too tall for the city's fire trucks to reach. Some jumped to their deaths in what seems like an eerie repetition of what we saw a century later at Ground Zero. The morgue is full of our victims, read the headline in the next day's forwards. Notice the language, our victims. There was no distance between Kahn and his readers then, no attempt to present journalism with a dispassionate eye. This was real, direct, visceral identification. Indeed, when people heard about the fire, they rushed into the Forward newsroom on 175 East Broadway to learn more. They knew where to go. In his editorials, Kahn did not hold back. The entire neighborhood is sitting Shiva, he wrote 2 days later. Every heart is torn to mourning. The human heart is drowning in tears. What a catastrophe. What a dark misfortune. But he forcefully dismissed the notion that this was a natural disaster that could not have been prevented. Here's what he wrote. Is it natural that hundreds of youth should be imprisoned in a 10-story fire trap? Is it natural for so many people to be crowded together and for there not to be enough emergency exits? Is it natural for such a fire trap of a building to have locked doors? And then, there should be no doubt that the capitalist leaders are generally guilty for this, who do all in their power to extract as much profit as possible from their capital, even if it costs thousands of lives. On the altar of capitalism, that bloodthirsty idol, which is never quenched with human blood, burned these young lives. No question about where Ab Kahn stood. But then World War II changed everything. The sharp decline in Jews who spoke and read Yiddish led the Forward to eventually become a weekly paper that continues to be published in Yiddish with a very small but devoted audience. Regional Jewish newspapers became owned or subsidized by the local federations or philanthropic individuals, maintaining their roles as dispenser of community news, but not the independent voice of a true press. Simultaneously, Jews became leaders in the mainstream press. Adolf Ochs turned the New York Times into the finest newspaper in America, perhaps the world. Eugene Myers transformed the Washington Post from a disregarded rag to the most eminent paper in the nation's growing capital. Joseph Pulitzer created the journalism school at Columbia University, of which I am a proud graduate. And the Annenberg family bought the Philadelphia Inquirer and laid the groundwork for it to become a newspaper of great repute. No longer needing to practice journalism outside the mainstream, Jews were the mainstream, although some of those Jews were not necessarily eager to acknowledge their identification. As Deborah Lipstadt demonstrates in her powerful book, Beyond Belief, the American press, led by the New York Times, failed to treat the destruction of European Jews as urgent news, or really as news at all, from 1933 to 1945. The Jews holding the power of the press in their hands did not necessarily use it to write about the biggest Jewish story of the 20th century before the foundation of the State of Israel. True also, Abe Rosenthal had to hide his Jewishness behind his initials. He was always known as A.M. Rosenthal when he became a reporter for the New York Times. But as executive editor, he inaugurated an era of accomplishment for Jews on that staff. Max Frankel, an immigrant from Germany, succeeded him. Joseph Lelyveld, son of a prominent rabbi, succeeded him. For a time, people in the New York Times newsroom wondered if there'd ever be a non-Jewish executive editor. Today, Jews are accepted major players in all aspects of journalism. Personally, I never have had a problem with melding my Jewish self with my work during decades in mainstream media. And there were moments when my work allowed me to be an eyewitness to our own history. My most memorable experience during 25 years of the Philadelphia Inquirer was standing on that very, very cold bridge in Berlin in February of 1986 to see the man then known as Anatoly Sharansky zigzag his way to freedom. But as is true in so many realms in America, this acceptance in wider society has diluted the need to maintain purely Jewish journalism and placed serious stress on the future. It's the classic dynamic of the universal versus the particular. In some communities, New York especially, Jewish stories are just, well, stories. Israel is news for everyone. Why maintain a specialized Jewish journalism? And if it's necessary, how should it be supported and funded? How can it be as essential to Jews in America in the 21st century as the Forward was a century earlier? Well, as you can guess, that first question, why maintain a specialized Jewish journalism, is, for me, rhetorical. I would never have left my family home, my friends and community in Philadelphia, if I didn't believe unequivocally in the mission, indeed the necessity, of today's Jewish Daily Forward. Alone, really, among American Jewish media organizations, we see our role as being a watchdog for our community. We prize our independence and employ it to hold our readers accountable. We publish the salaries of the leaders of the 75 largest Jewish communal organizations in the country every year. And note how few of them are women, a number that, unfortunately, has remained stubbornly low. We write about the cover-up of child sexual abuse among some in the Haredi community and the terrible treatment of workers and animals in the kosher meat industry, and the plight of the Jewish middle class in today's unforgiving economy. I often say that I edit the forward for the old me, the suburban mom with kids in day school, active and interesting in the Jewish world, but not employed by it, more eager to keep up with news trends and arts and culture than the latest ins and outs of the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations whose names and roles I could never quite keep straight. I want the forward to give the old me the information I need to make wise decisions about my donations to Jewish causes, to understand the American-Israel relationship, to know that someone is following the Jewish money in communal organizations, in politics, wherever it leads. Sadly, most Jewish organizations, news organizations, are not equipped to do this kind of labor-intensive, high-stake, and sometimes truly risky work. Either they don't have the budget or the talent, or they don't have the independence to take on the powers that be. Most Jewish news organizations in this country, including the new web-only startups, are either partially or entirely funded by their local federations, or are supported by a philanthropist with a particular point of view. The Forward can only maintain its independence because of its endowment, left to us by the old socialists who, it turns out, were damn good businessmen. But we can't rely on that forever, which is why, in addition to growing our advertising and circulation, we are now a 501c3 nonprofit and actively soliciting donations to ensure our future. We struggle with gigantic economic challenges everyone in journalism faces today, but as I mentioned before, since we are Jews, only more so. The industry's business model has been upended, with readers abandoning print to read more online and on mobile devices, and with advertisers doing the same. The problem, of course, is that virtually no one in our industry has figured out how to make money online. A few name brands, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, can put up a paywall and charge for usage through one method or another. But that is a very difficult proposition for most of us. I have watched with trepidation the evolution of haaretz.com from a totally free website to one in which readers have to pay for content, along with a shift in their emphasis from print to online journalism. The change has caused tremendous upheaval, with a reduction in readership and, quite recently, a strike by their employees. It's not at all clear whether that superb news organization, so critical to the health of the Israeli civic dialogue, will survive, and in what form. Other sites use their enormous traffic to some economic advantage, but the Forward and Jewish news sites are never going to be a Politico or a Huffington Post. Jews are just too small a sliver of the American population to expect that level of readership and, frankly, that volume of news. Still, I do not bemoan this wave towards digital journalism. I embrace it, and not just because I have to. I truly believe that it enables us to do better journalism by using images, both still and moving images, to tell more compelling stories, by using the tools of social media to engage our readers and solicit input, whether it is to find the best challah recipe or identify Jews for our annual Forward 50 list of who are doing amazing things in their community. And we can reach a much broader audience than ever before. Think about it. When Kahan published the Yiddish Forward, only those who could read and understand Yiddish could access its content. When the English Forward was launched in 1990, only those who saw the printed newspaper could access its content. And that meant that the vast majority of its readers were Jewish, and kind of Jewy Jews at that. Now, we have more readers online than in print. Our content is linked to on everything from well-known news sites to food blogs. We are part of the mainstream conversation, and we want to be even more so. This evolution mirrors the evolution of Jews in America, who have moved from an insular and defined community first to one that carefully assimilated into the mainstream society, and now to one that pulls the levers of power everywhere, from the White House to Silicon Valley to the Ivy League. But with this broader palette comes real responsibility. Kahan's thundering editorials were read by people who knew him, understood his language and his references, appreciated that he was talking within the family. My editorials can be read by anyone. That's heady, but it's also, frankly, a little frightening. If I criticize the government of Israel, will those words be used against her by her enemies? But if I refrain from such criticism, am I stifling the very act of dissent so valued in our tradition? This conundrum is even more present for the editors of regional newspapers or more official organs like JTA, who feel the weight of representing their communities, even if they don't always express it just that way. And who are our readers? In Kahn's day, he could leave the office, walk through the streets of the Lower East Side, hang out in a barber shop, or at the Garden Cafe on the corner of East Broadway, and listen and learn. Apparently, he did that often, which is why his newspaper so accurately reflected his community and for many decades bound it together through the written word. The Jewish community today is diverse, spread out, difficult to characterize, and impossible to control. When we journalists say we are speaking to our community, what does that mean? Am I speaking for the highly educated and involved Jews in my Upper West Side neighborhood? Am I speaking to the old me back in Philadelphia? Or you here, 3,000 miles away? Or the Jews in Atlanta or Altoona? Or my children in Brooklyn? Just as scholars and community leaders, rabbis, philanthropists, and politicians have trouble defining who is a Jew, so do journalists. Identifying an audience and connecting with it was one of the central attributes of success in the old days of hot type, and it remains so in the new, confusing era of cyber journalism. I go back to my earlier definition of the mission of a news organization: inform, reflect, crusade, connect. We know how to inform and reflect. Those of us with the will and the resources can investigate and campaign and perform the watchdog function of classic journalism. But the more difficult challenge of the 21st century is to connect in meaningful ways, to create community in cyberspace as essential to its members as the old forward newsroom was in its time. The historian Jenna Weissman-Joslett, who is also a forward columnist, once wrote that Ab Kahan, quote, spent 51 years explaining America to its newest Americans, unquote. The Jewish media today doesn't need to explain America to its readers anymore. Instead, we need to use every tool at our disposal to tell the kind of compelling stories that bind one Jew to another in this promised and challenging land. Thank you very much.
Hi. Thank you, Jane. That was really interesting, insightful, and really gave a good historical overview and good overview of the contemporary issues that you and your colleagues are facing. I want to thank the Nemer Committee for inviting me to serve as the respondent. I should let you know that I wasn't chosen due to any expertise in journalism, unless you count my unpaid internship at the Washington Jewish Week in the summer of '92. But even though that was a long time ago, I have to say I do still have some journalist envy because, and I think some of my social science colleagues share this feeling. You and your colleagues write an article or two every week, and they're read by thousands and thousands of people. We write 1 or 2 articles a year, and if we're lucky, we'll get 100 readers, maybe. You have the ability to affect widespread social change. We have new ideas. But actually, I think our jobs are similar in many ways. We're both observers of contemporary American Jewish life. And I do that by focusing on 3 related things: identity, community, and language. And I'll be talking about those 3 things in my response to your talk. I'm going to show how Jewish journalism builds identity and community, and the role that language plays in all that. So I was particularly interested in your question of audience. Who is reading Jewish news sources today, and who are those articles intended for? As I was thinking about these issues a few days ago, I learned about a developing story within Jewish journalism. The story centered around the Jewish press. Now, in this case, the Jewish press doesn't refer to the Jewish press, but it's one particular publication. It's a right-wing newspaper that is read mostly by Orthodox Jews, based in New York. And last Thursday, the Jewish press website published an op-ed by Rabbi Yaakov Rosenblatt titled "An Open Letter to Sarah Silverman." The Orthodox rabbi criticized the comedian's politics, her vulgar presentation style, and especially the fact that she's unmarried and childless at age 42. This article aroused strong feelings, as you might expect, and some of them were angry, some of them supportive. The first comment was an irate response from Sarah's father, Donald Silverman. Last I checked, there were almost 700 comments on that article's website. The article and Donald's response were mentioned on several other Jewish sites, including Haaretz, The Forward, JTA, The Jewish Chronicle, Juicy, Heb, and Tablet. And it also made headlines outside of the Jewish world: Entertainment Weekly, The Atlantic, Jezebel, Hollywood Reporter, Business Insider, and The Huffington Post. According to editors at the Jewish press, this attention doubled their web traffic. And I checked, and it's normally about 50,000 site visitors per day. And at one point, they even posted a message that the added traffic made their site crash. Now, the Jewish press seemed to relish this attention and the many first-time visitors to their site. A few days after the article was posted, there was a big red banner across the site saying, "Click here for the open letter to Sarah Silverman that everyone on the internet is talking about." Editors at the Jewish press participated several times in the comment discussions, and sometimes they directed commenters to other articles on their site that they might be interested in. Stephen Levitt, the manager of JewishPress.com, wrote an editorial based on his analysis of comments on this article, contrasting his regular readers to the new visitors in terms of values and culture. I think this incident really gets at Jane's question of audience and her points about how the internet has changed all of this. Here's an Orthodox rabbi writing in an Orthodox publication, but who's his intended audience? Based on the content, it doesn't seem that he's speaking to the regular readers of the Jewish press. In fact, many of those regular readers had never heard of Sarah Silverman before they read this article, as a few of the commenters pointed out. And a Jewish press blogger even wrote an article saying, "Who is this Sarah Silverman?" If we look at the language of the article, though, it becomes even more clear that his intended audience was not primarily Orthodox Jews. In my research, which Paul mentioned is going to be explained in detail in the book that's coming out in a few weeks, I've found that Orthodox Jews speaking and writing to other Orthodox Jews tend to use many Hebrew and Yiddish words. In this article, Rosenblatt uses only one, kosher. Now, this is a word that most Americans know. He talks about God, not Hashem. He talks about holiness rather than Kedusha, and there are many other examples. Now, other articles in the Jewish press do tend to use dozens of Hebrew words. For example, here's a sentence from an article by Rabbi J. Simcha Cohen from October 4th. The Baal HaTanya, however, rules unequivocally that the prohibition of using a davar shemekabel tuma to support kosher schach is merely an isur lechatchila for the builder of the sukkah. Okay, you might be thinking, well, that sounds like an article about Jewish law. True. In fact, that comes from the Jewish Press website section called Halacha and Hashkafa. So it's another example of how the website uses Jewish language, distinctively Jewish language. But it doesn't take long to find articles that are similar to Rosenblatt's that use Hebrew and Yiddish. Here's a quote from a recent op-ed by Mordechai Bienstock calling for Orthodox Jews to be more engaged, quote, outside the walls of the Orthodox community. He says, "We can be truly ourselves in all our pursuits, expressing the wonderful individualistic neshamas Hashem has granted us through the application of our special natures in the physical world, what the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples discovered as the basis for avoda begashmiut. Neshamas means souls, Hashem means God, and avoda begashmiut means serving God through the physical world. It's a Hasidic concept." Even Rosenblatt himself uses Hebrew and Yiddish words in his other articles in the Jewish press. For example, in an article about internet filters, he uses the phrases our frum community, reminiscent of the our community that you mentioned from Ab Kahan, which frum means religious. He talked about Kiddush Hashem, meaning sanctifying God's name, and Halacha Chabura, a study group about Jewish law. So it's clear from the language that the rabbi did not write this open letter to Sarah Silverman with an Orthodox audience in mind. And it's clear from the content and tone that he didn't intend to preach to the choir about the importance of childbearing. So why was it published in the Jewish press? Well, it turns out that wasn't his first choice. 4 days after the article was published, Rob Eschman, editor of the Los Angeles Jewish Journal, wrote on his blog that Rabbi Rosenblatt originally submitted the article to the Jewish Journal. And who knows, maybe he submitted it to the Forward, I won't ask, or other venues, who knows. But as it turned out, the venue really didn't matter, because the article ended up reaching a very broad audience. Somehow Sarah Silverman's dad found out about it the day it was published. Now, I'm not sure how. Maybe he has a Google alert set to let him know when his daughter is mentioned anywhere online, or maybe a friend of his posted it on Facebook. That's how I found out about it. A non-Orthodox friend of mine posted it on Facebook, and I asked him how he heard about it, and he said someone else had posted it on Facebook. So who knows, maybe someone who read the Jewish press posted it on Facebook, and then their friends posted it on their Facebook. And so let me ask, how many have you had heard of this story before today? Okay, of those hands, about a dozen or maybe 2 dozen, how many of you read it directly from the Jewish press first? One person, okay. How many of you heard about it from Facebook? How many of you heard about it from a Jewish news source? Okay, and from a non-Jewish news source like the Huffington Post or something else? Okay, so you see a lot of diversity there. And you see this really is a good example of overlapping networks and the importance of websites in spreading news. So tens of thousands of the people who heard about this story were interested enough to go to the Jewish Press website and read about it. And hundreds of those were moved enough to leave comments there. And it's really amazing how diverse those commenters were. Some of them are Orthodox Jews who are right-wing and support the rabbi, according to their comments. Some are Orthodox Jews who criticize the rabbi and even support Donald Silverman. Some of them are left-wing, non-Orthodox Jewish feminists who defend Sarah Silverman's decisions. and some are not even Jewish. One man posted a comment on jewishpress.com even before the article had made it to mainstream news venues. He wrote, "I'm a non-believer and a non-Jew, and I have to agree with the rabbi." Other responses by non-Jews bordered on anti-Semitism, talking about genital mutilation, a hole in the sheet, and other things that I really can't say in mixed company. But what's interesting about these comments is that many of them use language to indicate that they're Jewish, or that they're connected to Jews, or that they're Orthodox. Some of them use words that are commonly known by non-Jews, like mensch, oy vey, bris. But some of them are phrases that only Jews who are knowledgeable about traditional Jewish life would know. For example, one commenter uses the phrase, "I would like to be dan l'chaf zchut." Now this means to give the benefit of the doubt. And it's to be dan l'chaf zchut is a periphrastic phrase. A periphrastic verb is a linguistic term meaning the verb to be with a Hebrew word or phrase. And this construction really sounds strange to most non-Orthodox Jews, but it's very common in Orthodox communities. By using this phrase, the person who posted that comment was indicating that he himself is Orthodox or somehow has insider knowledge of Orthodox life. I found another example of this on juicy.com, another Jewish news source or source of opinion and culture writing. Devorah Myers wrote a biting critique of the rabbi's letter, and she ended with an ironic blessing to the rabbi. "May you be zoche to live many, many more years, to see the continued march of feminism and more women like Silverman who use public platforms to fight for what they believe in, regardless of whether or not they've chosen to procreate." The phrase "to be zoche," meaning to merit, is also a periphrastic verb that's very common among Orthodox Jews. By ending with this mock blessing, and by including Orthodox language, Myers makes her critique of the rabbi's article all the more potent, even if he himself did not use specifically Orthodox language. So I told you at the beginning that I would talk about identity, community, and language, and now I'm going to bring them all together. I think it's clear that language plays an important role in identity. In this case, in how people show the world who they are on the internet. This applies to journalists, to bloggers, and even to people commenting online. They might use Hebrew or Yiddish words ironically, but even then, they're using language as a means of performing their identity. Language also builds community. When someone throws in an oy vey or calls someone a mensch on a non-Jewish website, they're indicating some connection to Jews and Jewish culture, even if they themselves are not Jewish. Reading a Yiddish or Hebrew word online can make a Jew feel connected to other Jews, or other Jews of a certain type, ethnic, Orthodox, religiously knowledgeable, whatever. Language also builds communities in the opposite way by forging communal boundaries. So most people who read "to be dan l'chaf zchut" will feel left out of this conversation. Of course, it's not just language that builds community on Jewish news sites. It's also Jewish content. Even if non-Jews are now part of the conversation too, Jewish journalism continues to connect Jews to other Jews, especially to Jews like them. To sum up, the Sarah Silverman Lettergate incident, as one Jewish blogger calls it, is a great example of the trends in Jewish journalism that Jane talked about. It shows that even Orthodox websites are sometimes part of the mainstream conversation. It's clear that Rabbi Rosenblatt intended his article for a non-Orthodox audience. I'm not sure how he'd feel about all the non-Jews who responded too, especially those with the very negative responses. But the events of the past week made it clear, especially to the editors of the Jewish press, that publishing something online puts it out there for the world to see. This episode also shows the role of language in how Jews indicate identity and build community on Jewish news websites. These communities may be temporary and fleeting, and they certainly include non-Jews too. But for many Jews, reading and commenting on Jewish stories online strengthens their connection to the imagined community of the Jewish people. Jane, you said that Jewish journalism should inform, reflect, crusade, connect. I really like that phrase. And you said we need to inform our readers and listeners, reflect upon their lives, champion their causes, and connect them to each other and the broader community. As the Sarah Silverman incident shows, you and your colleagues are doing a great job with all of these. And the internet is enabling you to reach a much broader audience. And I have to say, all of this leads to more and more data for sociolinguists like me to analyze. So thank you very much.
And I'm happy to open it up to the audience if there are questions. Yes.
My granddaughter, who's a senior in high school, is an editor of a school newspaper, very serious about becoming a journalist. Do you think she's going to have a job? Especially from her generation. Do you think that they're going to be interested in Jewish newspapers or whatever it's going to be? Can you hear me?
I want you to repeat the question before you answer it.
The question was, and can you all hear me? Yeah? Wonderful. Well, the gentleman asked if his granddaughter, who is a senior in high school, will have a job if she's really interested in journalism. I sure hope so. The profession is changing so quickly that it's hard to know who would employ her and in what manner, but I just believe so strongly that there is going to still be a need and a market for good journalism. I think that many of the organizations are going to be changing. I think that journalists of the future are going to have to be digitally competent. They're going to have to know how to take photographs and take video and do many things online that, frankly, we've probably not even heard of yet. But the central task of reporting information, verifying facts, presenting it to the public, and then following up on it, I just believe that it will still be here. Look, one of my daughters is interested in journalism, so she's a little older than your granddaughter, but I hope it's going to be around for her as well.
Hi, you both were talking about how, oh, thank you, sorry. Oh, cool. You both were talking about how there's this growth of this like digital era and how it's all kind of changing right now, and you both spoke about it in a really positive way for the Jewish community, but I'm wondering if, in a way, it could be negative in the sense that there's becoming this mass American culture and we're sort of losing important parts of culture. So I don't know if that's a negative thing in a way for Jewish or for Judaism.
I think, like with anything in this world, there are blessings and troubles. There are good things and bad things. I'm really struck by Sarah's work in terms of language, because she was saying what I think about practically every day. You know, how much of the words that we use among ourselves do we need to explain to a broader audience? Do we say the Sabbath or Shabbat? We know we don't have to explain what a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah is, but we have to explain what a pidyon haben is. We have been writing a lot recently about a big controversy in New York about metzitza b'peh, which is a ritual associated with some circumcision. How much do we have to explain it in each story? How much can we assume our readers know? We can't assume very much anymore. You know, the rabbi who criticized Sarah Silverman, I thought you were so brilliant in pointing out that he didn't, in fact, use the kind of language that he would have ordinarily used in his smaller group. And so therefore, we have to think about what's being lost. You know, I think about it every day in terms of Yiddish. I'm not a Yiddish speaker myself. The Yiddish Forward is published by a separate staff of people who are really, really devoted to the language and the culture. And frankly, their audience is aging and diminishing. Hopefully there'll be younger people who are learning the language, but they will access the Yiddish Forward online. They won't get it in print. And so I think you're absolutely right. There are things that are being lost and things that are being gained. And a lot of unknowns. And we just have to figure out how to weave our way through them in a sense that still continues to bind us together while accepting that we're also going to be part of a much broader community.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll address that, exactly what you were just saying. So I'm in the middle of a project analyzing the use of Yiddish words in JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, over the past century. And the interesting thing is some of the words that I'm looking at, shul, chutzpah, daven, you see a few of them around the turn of the 20th century, and then nothing for 50 or 60 years. And then in the 80s and 90s, a few, and then they start to go up the last decade or two. And I think that's indicative of the American Jewish community in general using more and more Yiddish words recently. But I think it also shows that Jewish journalists are starting to feel more comfortable using these words in print without translating them. Now, yes, they will translate things like mitzitza b'peh and all of those phrases that I read in the Jewish press. If those were in the forward, they would certainly be translated. Even schach, probably. Maybe not sukkah, right?
You're right, not sukkah.
Okay. But I think it's a really interesting question that makes you think anytime you write or edit an article, who is the intended audience for this? And I think it's okay for a Jewish news venue not to expect that everybody will understand those words. And if they don't understand them, they can go to my website and look them up.
There's also this sort of issue of inclusiveness. We tend to associate Yiddish as the language of American Jews, but for one thing is Hebrew is the international language of Jews and of the state of Israel, and Ladino was and still in some senses remains the language of a whole swath of Jewry that's not from Eastern Europe, that comes from Arabic and North African cultures. And so I think that to be inclusive, we really have to include a lot more than what we just think of of the world of our grandfathers.
Okay, well, there are a lot of hands and only a little time, but yes, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I apologize for not being able to stand, Jane, Sarah. My question has to do with the fact that a number of years ago, you had a West Coast correspondent. We live in an area of, in my opinion, having studied it for 60 years, uniqueness. Do you see yourselves truly as a national publication, or are you overemphasizing the East without regard to the innovative and creative and unusual development of Jewish life and all that goes on in Jewish context and content here in the West?
We are definitely a national publication. 60% of our print readers live outside the New York metropolitan area, not just New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. So in fact, most of our readers are outside the big New York bubble. You are right, for about 2 years we had a full-time West Coast correspondent. We had to stop doing that for only one reason, and it was money. During the 2009, economic crash, we had to cut our budget, and it was thought that that would be the best of very, very bad options to cut. We now have a part-time correspondent here in Los Angeles, and certainly do get a lot of freelance writing from the West Coast in general in terms of not only news, but arts and culture. If I had more money, if someone would like to endow a correspondent, I absolutely agree with you. We try really, really hard not to think of New York as the only place. I mean, look, New York is the biggest collection of Jews outside of Israel, and many, many institutions are based there. But as I constantly remind my staff, as I said here tonight, I think of the forward for the old me, and that was somebody who wasn't in New York. And I think we really have an obligation to explore just you're absolutely right. All the amazing things that are going on in the West Coast and, in other parts of the United States as well. So I'm hoping, if our fundraising goes well, if all of you buy subscriptions and advertising, we can go back to affording someone full-time here.
Yes, go ahead. This lady's been recognized first.
I'm from New York. What is that? Oh, I see. One was the tog, which means the day, and the other was the forwards. Now, they both had reputations. The forwards was considered left-wing. The tog was considered right-wing. And as a result, the forwards was not terribly appealing to certain groups of people. They were too right-wing, too left-wing, and the tog was much more for the people. Today, the tog is gone. I don't think it's there anymore. But the Vorwärts, which I get to, also hasn't done much and isn't much what it used to be. And as far, the question is, why does it, the Vorwärts is right wing? The Vorwärts teugen Geld. That's all I can say.
Okay, thank you. The Yiddish Vorwärts is published by a separate group of people. I mean, we all work together in one office, but the news is created, written, and edited, put together absolutely separately from the English Forward. So I can't really tell you what is behind its political slant. We are a 501c3 organization, and so because of that, we have to be fairly balanced in our news coverage. We don't endorse candidates. We don't champion particular partisan causes. We have to be very careful of that because of the privilege of being a nonprofit.
Okay, sir.
Jane, a pleasure hearing you today. I'm Murray Fromson, former director of the School of Journalism at Annenberg, 60 years in journalism, and I have a question for both of you. It's called under the heading of the conspiracy of silence. And that has to do with whether or not it's the Jewish press in the United States or whether it's the Jewish press in Israel, but why the issue has been dodged completely when it is full knowledge by anybody who knows anything about national security that Israel has more nuclear weapons than any country in the world except the United States. And it has no reason to be fearful of Iran, because Iran is nowhere near that possibility. But that issue is not addressed by Jews in this country or by the press in any way.
Okay, in light of time, I think we need to keep the questions very
what do you think the role of the Jewish press should be, and what do you think the role of the press in general should be?
Well, honestly, I don't think that the issue of Iran has been ignored in the Jewish press or in the, in the mainstream media. I can only speak for my own organization, and we have written a lot, both in our news pages and published opinions from very, many, many different sources and points of view about Iran's nuclear program, about whether or not it's advisable for Israel to strike or whether or not it's advisable for the United States to strike. So I guess I have to politely disagree with the premise of your question, because I think we have covered it extensively.
Why don't we talk about Israel's capacity?
You can perhaps take that up after our formal session concludes. We're really running out of time, so I'm going to, one last question.
Thank you. We're very fortunate in LA. We have the Jewish Journal. What would your publication offer that the Jewish Journal doesn't offer to me?
Good question. The question was that you have the Jewish Journal, a very fine publication, and I have a great deal of respect for the people who run it and actually spent a lot of time in the last couple of days with them, and we have very friendly relations. The question was, what would the Forward offer that the Jewish Journal doesn't? I think we have a much more national focus, and I think we cover culture in a much broader way, and I think we have, with respect, and I don't think that David Suiso or Rob Eshman would disagree, I think we have a much, much more aggressive investigative reporting and enterprise reporting. I think there are things that the Jewish Journal does exceptionally well, especially because it is more, not exclusively, but it's more of a regional publication, focusing much more on California. Certainly the political coverage that they've been offering lately has been so good that we just ran a piece by Shmuel Rosner on our op-ed page this past week. In the papers that you, I hope, all picked up, you will see it. But I think that we have a much broader national focus and take very seriously our mandate to do enterprise and investigative reporting on the Jewish community, but also to cover arts and culture. For a newspaper of our size, our arts and culture section is really quite large. In the paper that you will all see now, we had, in addition to our regular arts and culture section, one of the largest book sections that we've had in years. And we think that that's also a really important component of binding the Jewish community together. Not everybody wants to know how much their local federation leader is making or about the latest issues with Israel, but they do want to learn about the amazing ferment in the arts and culture community in the United States and in Israel and around the world. And so I think that that is also what distinguishes us with the very fine Jewish Journal.
And I think it's important to get both of them. You can get them both daily in your inbox. If you sign up for the daily alerts for the Forward and for the Jewish Journal, and it will keep you informed of everything going on locally and nationally and internationally in the Jewish world.
Well, I'm going to call upon Professor Bruce Zuckerman to come and conclude our proceedings, but let me thank both panelists one more time and the audience for
Well, let me add my, well, let me add less feedback than I intended here. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Sarah. It occurred to me that these days when I find a Yiddish or a Jewish term that I can't figure out, which happens because I read a lot of stuff, I just go to Wikipedia, and there it is. And so it's not so hard to learn these things pretty fast. And like Jane, I have a son who's a journalist, or at least has been involved in journalism, so I also wonder about what the future of these things are going to be. But in any case, I do know that whether you read the Forward or the LA Jewish Journal, which, what? Or, I said, it shouldn't be an either or, it should be certainly a both and situation. And people in this audience in particular should be enriched by both things. They're complementary, not detracting one from the other. So anyway, that's the end of my editorial. And I want to thank you all for coming. Be sure to join our mailing list and receive our email notification of future Casden events, including, as you heard, the Nemer lecture next year, but we have several other events we do every year. So we hope you'll come. We're glad you came this time, and thank you, and have a good evening.